My name's Bianca. I am a JavaScript evangelist for Hack Reactor, which is an immersive JavaScript school in San Francisco. We have some cohorts coming up for our remote program as well as our in-person program in San Francisco. More details on that at hackreactor.com. And let's see. So I guess we'll just jump in. Most of us have completed the pre-course, the pre-event survey, so I kind of have an idea of your background, what you kind of have your expectations for the class and things like that. Normally I would do a round of introductions, but since we're running a few minutes behind, I'll probably save that for, I'll come around and meet the in-person people one by one during exercise time, just for fun. So this is a two-part class. Day one, we're going to do some JavaScript fundamentals. We're going to go over and deep dive objects, arrays, and functions. And then tomorrow, we are going to go even further and take what we learned today and practice some functional JavaScript patterns with it. So lots of fun stuff coming up. For those of you who haven't seen it, we have some links to the slides. It's a bit.ly/JS102-slides1, as well as bit.ly/JS102-exercises, which that's where we'll be going during the exercise time. All right, well, let's get started. So first thing is, who is this class for? So maybe you've been studying on your own for a few months on Code Academy, Khan Academy, or more, and you're thinking, okay, what's that next step? I've done all the beginner resources, but I want more, and I can't seem to find that middle ground, and I'm not able to solidify and practice those concepts that I was introduced in these beginner tutorials. So that's what this class is for. So it's someone who's completed a tutorial before. You have at least 2 to 6 months experience practicing JavaScript, and you want to solidify those fundamentals. Maybe you're just looking for more practice, and even better, maybe you're interested in coming to Hack Reactor. And this class was initially designed actually to help people who don't have any traditional computer science experience get into Hack Reactor. So for those of you who are interested in that, this course is perfect for that. Cool. So like I mentioned before, this is a two-part course that I teach in the evenings and on the weekend at Hack Reactor. Part one, again, is just solidifying core JavaScript principles. We're going to do that using a project for practice. And then part two is just we're going to be getting started with some functional concepts in JavaScript, as well as introducing the underscore library and how to use it. And then afterwards, you can use this foundation to keep growing as an engineer, or apply to Hack Reactor, or I don't know. I think the next step is take over the world generally, but you know, whatever you want to do. So what are objects? How many people here have used it? Let's practice thumbs. Thumbs on objects. You've seen an object before. Everyone's got to do it. Even if you don't want to, you have to do it. Even Mark has to do it. So what is an object then? Can you tell me what an object is? Doesn't have to be 100% the whole definition, but what's a characteristic of an object? I'm going to sit here and stare at you until you answer. So,
a way to store data?
Yeah, so it's a data structure in which we store data. That's important for data-driven applications. We have to put our data somewhere.
Properties, methods?
Yeah, so we can store properties on them. They can be any type. They can be a function, which would make it a method, or it could be a string or a number, or it could be another object or an array. What else do we know about objects?
Key value pairs?
Absolutely. So we have a key value pair, where the key is a string, usually a series of characters, and a word that makes sense to us some way. Blueprint of a class we have online, something that has properties. Awesome. Cool. And all those things are right. So an object is a data structure. We have key value pairs. We store our data in there. And the data that we store at those property names can be any type. And just some overview of what we're going to talk about today as far as objects is we're going to talk about property access, assignment, bracket notation, dot notation, when to use the brackets, when to do the dots, what does it mean. We're going to get into nested objects, which is important when this is probably how you're going to encounter most of your objects anyways, in a nested data structure, usually in the form of JSON. And you're going to need to know how to traverse them and manipulate them to get that data out that you want, as well as change them and send them back to your API or your backend or whatever you're doing. And we're going to talk about iteration and how to, which is just a fancy word for looping, really. Cool. Awesome. So what we have here on this first slide is we have a variable called box, in which we're storing an object literal. So we just have an empty object here, and we're storing in a variable. Cool. Whoops. And here we have something called dot notation. And we're just creating a property on our object. And we do this by using a dot property name equals whatever value that is. And again, the value here can be any data type, even another object. And so in here's just a visual of what that would look like. So we have a property material here and a value here, cardboard. So my question to you is, when are some other times that you've seen dots in JavaScript?
jQuery chains.
Yeah, use them in jQuery? You guys have typed a bunch of dots in JavaScript before. What about online? Do we have any experience using dots?
Like in the URLs?
In URLs? Oh yeah, .com. That's true. That's true. That would be a string normally.
Function calls?
Who said that? Function calls. Yeah, so if we have a method, we use a dot. Where else have we seen dots? So I feel like these guys in the middle row to the left are averting their eyes. So when have you used some dots in JavaScript? In general, just
navigating directory structure.
okay, sure.
I haven't touched JavaScript in a few months, so
Okay.
refreshing.
Okay, you can open up your text editor, look at some old code, Command F, just a dot, and let me know what comes up. What about in the very back? When have we used dots in the very back? Anyone back there alive? You guys have never used a dot in JavaScript? Have you used a dot? When have you used dot?
In objects, in order to use dots, in order to refer the value of it, keyword value.
Yeah, absolutely. To get the value of an object.
Yeah, if it is hyphenated, we should not use or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, so we can't use like weird characters with dot notation. What about in the front? Did you answer the question yet?
Some people might use it for a namespace dereferencing, but that's not much more than traversing an object. So.
Yeah, totally. What about here with the striped shirt?
Properties?
Yeah, someone accessing a property.
I don't know if you already said that.
Mm-hmm. What about like dot length on an array? Who's done that? Dot length. Or what about dot push, dot pop, object dot keys. So we use dots a lot, and what I'm gonna let you know is that whenever you use a dot, you know for sure, unless it gives you an error, whatever to the left of the dot is an object. And so whether that's an array or a function, it's still at its core an object. And those rules, those syntax rules of dot notation, also bracket notation, which we'll go through soon, stay the same. And so that's important. That's important that all these things are objects and that we understand that as we're going through this workshop together. Cool. So we use dot notation to add a property, and now we're using dot notation to access a property. Whenever I have these two question marks here, That means I want you to answer the question. So what about plaid shirt, second row, here with the glasses, who's not paying attention to me? No worries. So what is this going to return?
Cardboard.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just going to return a string, cardboard. Just like that. And so that would be what we call access with dot notation.
Does your slide deck move mine on my screen if I'm watching down there?
I don't think so. I don't think so. The URL does reflect what slide I'm on. Could you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so. Cool, and so here we are returning that value cardboard and we're saving it in a variable CB. We've all done that before, right? Raise your hand. Thumbs on that. We've all done that? Great, good. If you haven't, I don't know. I don't know what to say. So we just said that this is cardboard, right? So here we are, we're creating an empty object, we're adding a property cardboard, we're using dot notation to access the value cardboard, and we're storing it in the variable CB. Then once we type out CB, and you can imagine that this is in the console, it's going to print out cardboard. And what happens if we say box.material and we assign it to titanium? We upgraded our box. We're no longer a cardboard box, and now we have titanium box. What is that? How is that going to affect CB?
Still cardboard.
Still cardboard. Does everyone agree? Still cardboard, not still cardboard. Cool. We have like some mixed feelings. And I'm going to assert that it is going to be cardboard. And this is an example of something we call storing things by value, which we hopefully will get to today. But it's just important to note that when we access the variable cardboard here, we're not actually looking up in our code and then referencing box.material. We're actually looking in memory where we had stored whatever value box.material is returning. And since box.material is returning cardboard, CB now only stores cardboard with no reference to box.material, and therefore CB here is going to be cardboard no matter if you change box.material later on in your code.
So to change CB, you explicitly then have to assign it whatever you're going to assign the new value.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And just a side note, this is dangerous, but just a side note that this isn't true for objects, arrays, and functions who are stored by reference. So this would be the opposite for that. But I'll hopefully get into more detail about that later.
And just to refresh on the dot material, so the second line, when we're using quotes, that's just when we're not using dot notation. So if I wanted to put material in quotes, obviously not with dot notation, but.
So material here, so dot notation assumes that it's a string. So you can assume that material, the property name material, is stored as a string, which has quotes around it.
Got it.
Yeah, but yeah, this syntax you won't use quotations. Good question. Cool. So we've discussed that box.material is going to return cardboard. What if we do box.size? What is that going to return? What is it?
Undefined.
Undefined. Thank you guys for answering that all in unison. It was beautiful. Just kidding. So undefined. Why am I writing undefined here with no quotes?
Undefined is a type.
Yeah, undefined is its own type. And therefore, if we put quotes around it, then becomes a string. And it's going to mean something completely different. So when we do a property lookup on something that doesn't yet exist in our object, we're simply going to get undefined. So we talked about dots. Now let's talk about brackets. So dots and brackets are pretty similar as far as functionality. The syntax is very different though, and the rules are also different. So we're here storing material, a property material on our box. And it's going to work exactly the same. So box.material is more or less equivalent to box bracket quote material. So you can kind of think of these two syntax as interchangeable to an extent. And so what is this going to return? How about you right here with the green sweatshirt?
Cardboard.
Yeah, totally cardboard. So we can use them interchangeably. It doesn't affect if we store a value using bracket notation. It doesn't affect our dot notation at all. And then here, what about green sweater in the second row? What is this going to return?
Cardboard as a string.
Totally, cardboard as a string. So here we are assigning value. So here's us assigning a value. Here's us accessing value. And if we wanted to then store, whoops, if we then wanted to store a value, we can just put it in CB, and then we can reference it later. Cool.
A quick question. Is that updating the property or the value on the object?
Which one? The second line?
So through just the brackets, is that updating the property name or the value?
So it's adding a property and a value. So it's doing both.
Ah, okay.
So it's not updating anything, it's just adding it.
Can you use that syntax in the second line there and then reference it with the dot notation later?
Absolutely.
So they're interchangeable?
Yeah, they're completely interchangeable. Totally. Well, they're completely interchangeable until they're not. And we're going to talk about when they're not. And so we're going to talk about variables. So when we're going to store our string value, our property name as a variable, we're going to then need to use dot notation, I'm sorry, bracket notation. But the important difference here is we're not going to use the quotations. So we see here in our code that we have our key here is going to be holding the string material. And then we then put in our brackets that variable name. What's this going to return? What about gray shirt last row? I wish you guys had name tags.
Material.
This is going to be material. Anyone want to help them out?
Well, these are keys, right?
Yeah, so this is going to be the key.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. So it's going to be cardboard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Key is, so if we just like here said console.log, for example, key, then that would be material, right? That makes sense? You have a question?
Question in the chat room. The difference
sure.
between box with the curly braces and then if you were to do box equals new object.
The difference. So one is constructor notation and one is object literal notation. I'm going to recommend that you always use object literal notation. The keyword new is something you see a lot in object-oriented languages as well as object-oriented JavaScript when you're doing those patterns. That's a little out of the scope of this class. But yeah, and always just use this one, and you'll be fine. But they're essentially the same thing. Great question. Okay. So variables. So the important thing again about variables is that we're not going to put quotations around it because why? Anyone have a hunch on what would happen if we put quotations around key here?
It's just a string.
Absolutely. Then it's just a string and it will be interpreted by your browser as a property on box called key, which then would return undefined, right? Because we don't have a property called key on our object. Cool. And the cool thing about bracket notation as well is that it's actually evaluating expressions. So with dot notation, you can't put any expressions or any code to be evaluated. You can't say like, you know, box dot 1 plus 1. That just wouldn't work. However, with bracket notation, we can do that. And here's an example of us calling a function in our bracket notation. So here's a function creatively named func. We call that function, and it returns a string material. You think this is gonna work, guys? What's gonna print? I need to start mixing this up because everyone can just like guess cardboard and it's always gonna be right. I just realized.
So can you go back to that previous slide with when you did the key thing? Because
Sure.
you use quote. Now, if there happened to be a key called key, would it then return the value of that quote-unquote key or whatever, just like?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Exactly.
All right.
Hey Bianca, what are the rules around single quote and double quote?
The rules are that you should do as I say and not as I do because I kind of am not consistent in these slides with it. But be consistent. They have to match one side or the other. And generally, wherever you work, hopefully has a style guide, or if you're contributing to open source, there's a style guide that will tell you which one they prefer. You want it to match in your code base, but there isn't like a rule.
So the interpreter figures that out, that single quote and double quote, same thing?
Yeah. But for example, if like you did key like this, that wouldn't work. Yeah. But yeah, it's all the same. You had a question about?
That was the question in the chat room, so
Oh,
we just
okay.
answered it.
Cool. My slides
and-
are strategically created with single and double quotes so that it brings up that question. It's all planned.
Another question just came. Can properties be Unicode? If so, how do I quote them?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. Email me, bianca@hackreactor.com, and I'll get back to you on that.
You escape from the /u and then the hex code.
Oh, really? Cool. So the answer to that is you escape it, -u.
/u in the hex code.
Oh, /u in the hex code.
Interpret it as the Unicode.
Very cool. Thank you.
Could you give an example of Unicode? Is that difficult?
I don't know. You guys are asking hard questions. What would be an example of Unicode? I don't know. We can
Get
look
like
it
an
up.
ampersand or something.
Oh, if it was A, which is what? 65 decimal is
I don't know.
0 hex.
I don't have an example of Unicode, but that's something an easy Google search. Cool. So Hermanth is the person I should be upset with for asking me silly questions. Okay, cool. So here we go. So expressions. So our bracket notation, unlike dot notation, can handle expressions, and that's pretty cool.